Chapter 7. There was a rosebush on the little Sterling lawn, growing beside the gate. It was called Degree Das S Rosebush. Plus or minus cousin Georgiana had given it to Valency 5 years ago, and Valency had planted it joyfully. She loved roses. But of course, the rosebush never bloomed. That was her luck. Valency did everything she could think of and took the advice of everybody in the clan, but still the rosebush would not bloom. It throve and grew luxuriantly, with great leafy branches untouched of rust or spider, but not even a bud had ever appeared on it. Valency, looking at it 2 days after her birthday, was filled with a sudden, overwhelming hatred for it. The thing wouldn't bloom, very well, then. She would cut it down. She marched to the toolroom in the barn for her garden knife and she went at the rosebush viciously. A few minutes later, horrified Mrs. Frederick came out to the veranda and beheld her daughter slashing insanely among the rosebush boughs. Half of them were already strewn on the walk. The bush looked sadly dismantled. Degree Das, what on earth are you doing? Have you gone crazy, plus or minus? Degree no, plus or minus, said Valency. She meant to say it defiantly, but habit was too strong for her. She said it deprecatingly. Degree, I just made up my mind to cut this bush down. It is no good. It never blooms, never will bloom. Plus or minus. Degree, that is no reason for destroying it, plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick sternly. Degree, it was a beautiful bush and quite ornamental. You have made a sorry-looking thing of it. Plus or minus. Degree, rose trees should bloom plus or minus, said Valency a little obstinately. Degree don't argue with me Das. Clear up that mess and leave the bush alone. I don't know what Georgiana will say when she sees how you have hacked it to pieces. Really, I am surprised at you. And to do it without consulting me plus or minus. Degree, the bush is mine, plus or minus, muttered Valency. Degree, what s that? What did you say, Das, plus or minus? Degree, I only said the bush was mine, plus or minus, repeated Valency humbly. Mrs. Frederick turned without a word and marched back into the house. The mischief was done now. Valency knew she had offended her mother deeply and would not be spoken to or noticed in any way for 2 or 3 days. Cousin Stickles would see to Valency's bringing up, but Mrs. Frederick would preserve the stony silence of outraged majesty. Valency sighed and put away her garden knife, hanging it precisely on its precise nail in the tool shop. She cleared away the severed branches and swept up the leaves. Her lips twitched as she looked at the straggling bush. It had an odd resemblance to its shaken, scrawny donor, little cousin Georgiana herself. Degree, I certainly have made an awful-looking thing of it, plus or minus, thought Valency. But she did not feel repentant, only sorry she had offended her mother. Things would be so uncomfortable until she was forgiven. Mrs. Frederick was one of those women who can make their anger felt all over a house. Walls and doors are no protection from it. Degree, you better go uptown and get the mail, plus or minus, said cousin Stickles, when Valency went in. Degree I can go, I feel all sorter peaky and piney this spring. I want you to stop at the drugstore and get me a bottle of Redfern's blood bitters. There's nothing like Redfern's bitters for building a body up. Cousin James says the purple pills are the best. But I know better. My poor dear husband took Redfern's bitters right up to the day he died. Don, let them charge you more and 90 cents. I can get it for that at the port. And what have you been saying to your poor mother? Do you ever stop to think, Das, that you can only have one mother, plus or minus? Degree 1 is enough for me, plus or minus, thought Valancy undutifully, as she went uptown. She got Cousin Stickles' bottle of bitters and then she went to the post office and asked for her mail at the general delivery. Her mother did not have a box. They got too little mail to bother with it. Valancy did not expect any mail except the _Christian Times _, which was the only paper they took. They hardly ever got any letters. But Valancy rather liked to stand in the office and watch Mr. Carew, the gray-bearded, Santa Clausy old clerk, handing out letters to the lucky people who did get them. He did it with such a detached, impersonal, Jove-like air, as if it did not matter in the least to him what supernal joys or shattering horrors might be in those letters for the people to whom they were addressed. Letters had a fascination for Valancy, perhaps because she so seldom got any. In her blue castle, exciting epistles, bound with silk and sealed with crimson, were always being brought to her by pages in livery of gold and blue, but in real life her only letters were occasional perfunctory notes from relatives or an advertising circular. Consequently, she was immensely surprised when Mr. Carew, looking even more jovian than usual, poked a letter out to her. Yes, it was addressed to her plainly, in a fierce, black hand, Degree Miss Valancy, Sterling, Elm Street, Deerwood plus or minus, and the postmark was Montreal. Valancy picked it up with a little quickening of her breath. Montreal. It must be from Dr. Trent. He had remembered her, after all. Valancy met Uncle Benjamin coming in as she was going out and was glad. The letter was safely in her bag. Degree what, plus or minus, said Uncle Benjamin. Degree is the difference between a donkey and a postage stamp, plus or minus. Degree I don't know. What, plus or minus, answered Valancy dutifully. Degree 1 you lick with a stick and the other you stick with a lick. Ha. Ha, plus or minus. Uncle Benjamin passed in, tremendously pleased with himself. Cousin Stickles pounced on the _Times when Valancy got home, but it did not occur to her to ask if there were any letters. Mrs. Frederick would have asked it, but Mrs. Frederick's lips at present were sealed. Valancy was glad of this. If her mother had asked if there were any letters, Valancy would have had to admit there was. Then she would have had to let her mother and Cousin Stickles read the letter and all would be discovered. Her heart acted strangely on the way upstairs, and she sat down by her window for a few minutes before opening her letter. She felt very guilty and deceitful. She had never before kept a letter secret from her mother. Every letter she had ever written or received had been read by Mrs. Frederick. That had never mattered. Valancy had never had anything to hide. But this did matter. She could not have anyone see this letter. But her fingers trembled with a consciousness of wickedness, and unfilial conduct as she opened it trembled a little, too, perhaps, with apprehension. She felt quite sure there was nothing seriously wrong with her heart, but one never knew. Dr. Trent's letter was like himself, blunt, abrupt, concise, wasting no words. Dr. Trent never beat about the bush. Degree, Dear Miss Sterling, plus or minus, and then a page of black, positive writing. Valancy seemed to read it at a glance. She dropped it on her lap, her face ghost white. Dr. Trent told her that she had a very dangerous and fatal form of heart disease, angina pectoris, evidently complicated with an aneurysm, whatever that was, and in the last stages. He said, without mincing matters, that nothing could be done for her. If she took great care of herself she might live a year, but she might also die at any moment. Dr. Trent never troubled himself about euphemisms. She must be careful to avoid all excitement and all severe muscular efforts. She must eat and drink moderately, she must never run, she must go upstairs and uphill with great care. Any sudden jolt or shock might be fatal. She was to get the prescription he enclosed filled and carry it with her always, taking a dose whenever her attacks came on. And he was hers. Truly, H.B. Trent. Valancy sat for a long while by her window. Outside was a world drowned in the light of a spring afternoon, skies entrancingly blue, winds perfumed and free, lovely, soft, blue hazes at the end of every street. Over at the railway station a group of young girls was waiting for a train. She heard their gay laughter as they chattered and joked. The train roared in and roared out again. But none of these things had any reality. Nothing had any reality except the fact that she had only another year to live. When she was tired of sitting at the window, she went over and lay down on her bed, staring at the cracked, discolored ceiling. The curious numbness that follows on a staggering blow possessed her. She did not feel anything except a boundless surprise and incredulity, behind which was the conviction that Dr. Trent knew his business and that she, Valancy Sterling, who had never lived, was about to die. When the gong rang for supper, Valancy got up and went downstairs. Mechanically, from force of habit. She wondered that she had been let alone so long. But of course her mother would not pay any attention to her just now. Valancy was thankful for this. She thought the quarrel over the rosebush had been really, as Mrs. Frederick herself might have said, providential. She could not eat anything, but both Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles thought this was because she was deservedly unhappy over her mother's attitude, and her lack of appetite was not commented on. Valancy forced herself to swallow a cup of tea and then sat and watched the others eat, with an odd feeling that years had passed since she had sat with them at the dinner table. She found herself smiling inwardly to think what a commotion she could make if she chose. Let her merely tell them what was in Dr. Trent's letter, and there would be as much fuss made as if, Valancy thought bitterly, they really cared two straws about her. Dr. Trent's housekeeper got word from him today, plus or minus, said Cousin Stickles, so suddenly that Valancy jumped guiltily. Was there anything in thought waves? Mrs. Judd was talking to her uptown. They think his son will recover, but Dr. Trent wrote that if he did he was going to take him abroad as soon as he was able to travel and woon be back here for a year at least. Plus or minus. That will not matter much to us plus or minus, said Mrs. Frederick majestically. He is not our doctor. I would not plus or minus. Here she looked or seemed to look accusingly right through Valancy. Have him to doctor a sick cat. Plus or minus. May I go upstairs and lie down, plus or minus, said Valancy faintly. I have a headache. Plus or minus. What has given you a headache, plus or minus, asked Cousin Stickles, since Mrs. Frederick would not. The question had to be asked. Valancy could not be allowed to have headaches without interference. You ain't in the habit of having headaches. I hope you re not taking the mumps. Here, try a spoonful of vinegar. Plus or minus. Piffle, plus or minus, said Valancy rudely, getting up from the table. She did not care, just then, if she were rude. She had had to be so polite all her life. If it had been possible for Cousin Stickles to turn pale, she would have. As it was not, she turned yellower. Are you sure you ain't feverish, Das? You sound like it. You go and get right into bed, plus or minus, said Cousin Stickles, thoroughly alarmed. And I'll come up and rub your forehead and the back of your neck with Redfern S liniment. Plus or minus. Valency had reached the door, but she turned. Degree I1 TB rubbed with Redfern S liniment, plus or minus, she said. Cousin Stickles stared and gasped. Degree what do you mean, plus or minus? Degree I said I wouldn't TB rubbed with Redfern S liniment, plus or minus, repeated Valency. Degree horrid, sticky stuff. And it has the vilest smell of any liniment I ever saw. It's no good. I want to be left alone, that s. All. Plus or minus. Valency went out, leaving Cousin Stickles aghast. Degree she's feverish, she must be feverish, plus or minus, ejaculated Cousin Stickles. Mrs. Frederick went on eating her supper. It did not matter whether Valency was or was not feverish. Valency had been guilty of impertinence to her